Hi, my name is Talia Bigelow. I actually work here at the School for Marine Science and Technology. It's a part of UMass, the University of Massachusetts. And today I'm going to tell you how to eat a lobster, try to give you some pointers on how to open one up. When you go to the store and you get your lobster, it's really important to see whether or not the tail is hard and curled under, like this one is. It's already been boiled. Before it's boiled, that means that the lobster has been dead for a little while, and those lobsters are not good to eat. They'll send you to the hospital. The second point is that a lot of people say you're paying a lot more for a soft-shell crab than you should be, and that's because the inside of a soft-shell crab, like this one here, is filled with a lot more water than a lobster that hasn't molted yet. And that's because when the lobster molts, it actually gets rid of its outer shell, which is too tight and small for it, and gets a new coat essentially, and to hold itself in. And at that point, the meat inside is very small because it's put on a new big coat. So there's not much meat inside of the lobster. And at that point, some people will claim that that lobster is a lot sweeter and a lot better tasting, and the meat has a better texture to it. But other people will claim that you're paying a lot of money for the water weight inside of the lobster, and you're not paying for the lobster meat itself. So here I have several lobsters. I've actually gotten a male and a female today for you to see. I've got in here, you can tell a male is a male because of two things. The first is you can kind of see the way that the tail is shaped. And as you can see with this guy, his tail is shaped kind of cylindrically like this, and it comes down into a point here more than a female's does. A female will be nice and wide, which I'll show you in a second. But the most important part are its sexual organs right here. This is a male lobster because he's got these pointy, sharp instruments of insemination. And then we also have a female here, and hers are more feathery and they're softer. You can definitely feel they're softer, and they're actually wider as well. And you can't see it with this female because she's pretty young. She's still a chicken lobster. But what you would typically see is that this tail is much larger and wider than the male's. And you can see that her the side bits of her tail here come up and make more of a U shape. And that's because the eggs are going to be in here, and that's where they stay. That's where they mature. So anyway, enough of the biology. I'm going to show you how to eat this sucker. The first thing I do actually is crack the lobster open, take the tail apart from the carapace. And the easiest way to do that is just break it open. And one thing you'll notice is that there's actually a lot of water that's going to come out of the two bits that you have afterwards. So you just got to shake it off. I've got a hole in my table here, so I'm all set. And then if I'm going for the tail meat first, I come over here and I give it a bit of a crack, which is kind of hard, just to loosen it up. And if I want to keep the whole piece of the tail intact, what I do is I come in here and I try to kind of, this middle, there's kind of 5 parts to a tail. This part of the tail is actually broken on this girl, but this sort of middle part here can be pulled off first. Oops, that was a poor job. These guys are really soft, and I'll talk about that in a second, why they're soft. But here we go. I got it nice and open. I rip it open just a little bit. And what I can do is push my thumb in the tail like this, and the whole tail chunk is just going to come right out, just like that. And you can say see this little chunk here actually was a part of the bit I broke off first, and I got to keep it on there, which is excellent. Now this bit here, the green bit, is called the tamale, and some people prefer to eat the tamale and some people don't. I don't. I think it's nasty. I also know that a lot of the sediments and toxic issues in the ocean can get, consolidated there would be the word, I think. So I don't like to eat it, so I actually break that off typically. And then you can see there's sort of this inside digestive tract. You can see that orange line down here. And I like to pick that out. That's where they send the poop, so you don't want to be eating that. And you got to get rid of the orange bits as well. And then there you go. You have a nice, you can kind of, if you want to wash off a little bit of that green, but there you've got a nice big chunk of tail meat. Perfect. So after the tail meat's done, now some people like to do this and some people don't, but I figured I'd show you guys. These little bits of the tail, they're called the telson. You can actually rip them off as well. And there's going to be little bits of meat inside those. And you can get at those. It's kind of like opening a letter here. You stick the fork in, into the tail. I don't know if you guys can see that. and kind of just rip it open like that. And then you should be able to open it kind of like a letter. And then do the same to the other side. Excuse me. Just like that. And you ought to be able to open the whole thing up. And there you go, just a tiny little piece of meat. Now some people would say that's not worth it. That's up to you. But some people really like that piece, so there you go. And you can do that on all the different pieces of tail. Keep in mind when you're ripping the telsons off of the tail that this kind of connector tissue right here is going to be the tastiest bit. So you want to make sure you get that off like that. The next thing you could do, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. The first thing you could go for is the legs. Now the legs are similar to the tail I just showed you. They don't necessarily have that much meat in them, so it's questionable whether you want to spend the effort and time getting them open. The first thing to do is rip them off and try to keep this connector bit, which is inside the body, kind of together, just like that. Now you can get rid of this, which is actually a gill I just pulled out. But then you have this whole leg, and there's a bunch of meat in here. Well, relatively a bunch of meat. And these are tough to get at. Some people have different techniques. My favorite is I just rip it open and I suck. And I just ate a delicious piece of meat that you couldn't see. Another way to do it would be to kind of use your fork or knife, just like a letter opener, just like I did with the other piece of the tail. It's all up to you. And you get little tiny pieces of meat like this, but they are delicious. I'll move on to the next best part, which is the claw. Now my favorite part of it is the tail and the claw, but I think the tail is my favorite part, but I also like the claw. So rip off the claw. You can do it pretty easily. They should come off if you've steamed or boiled them. It should just come off real nice and easy. And the first thing to do is take, these are the knuckle bones. You want to take the claw and the knuckle bone and just rip it open, just like you've done everything else. There's going to be a lot of water in that claw as well, so you want to empty that out. Okay, and then if you've got a rubber band on there, you might want to remove it. And the next thing you can do now, if you want to keep this whole piece of meat intact, good luck. There's some ways you can do it. I'll try to show you now. I like to take a little crack off the top of the claw, like that, and break it open. Now this is as good a time as any to point out that this lobster was very soft. A soft-shelled lobster is when the lobster has just recently molted and it's growing back its shell. But in the process, that shell is still pretty flimsy and weak, and you can see that definitely here where I can push down and the shell just goes right in. That's not because I boiled it, it's because it's soft in general. And the problem that some people see in that is that they're soft and they haven't actually grown back into their shell yet. So it's kind of like growing into a big new overcoat. You have to, at first they're small inside of it, and then they keep growing and growing until they reach a very hard shell stage. So as you can see in this one, he was a soft shell lobster. Excuse me, I don't know why I keep saying crab. You can just see how little meat there was inside that claw as compared to the size of the claw itself. And all I did there was just use my fingers to rip that open. Some people are really good at pulling out this sort of inner claw bit as well. You have to be careful because this connector muscle right here will get in your way sometimes, but basically you can try to get the claw meat out just like that. And then this is really delicious with a little bit of butter as well. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the knuckle bone. The knuckle bone is real easy to get at with a pair of nut crackers. You just go ahead and try to crack as much as you possibly can. Pull out as much of the meat as you can. So I don't have much meat in that little knuckle there, the first knuckle, but in this segment here I should have some good meat. Very soft shell. Just kind of rip it away, kind of like you peel a very tough fruit, I guess. You can just see that meat emerging out of there, and there you go. There's your piece of meat. Ew. Right there. Now you might want to, when you're going to open up a lobster, you might want to put on a different shirt or something that can protect you, like an apron, like my pretty apron here. The reason being that this fat and these juices are pretty smelly, and particularly if you leave them overnight, I would say if you're cleaning up your kitchen at the end of the night, clean as much as you possibly can because it can get really smelly the next day. So there you go, I got a little bit of knuckle meat out. Some people will go ahead and eat what's in the carapace. Now this is the carapace. You can see here's its legs, right? And this is what it uses to walk along the bottom. And this is its mouth bit here. You can see its mouth. These are the bits that it uses to get the food into its mouth, like this. You can just see the inside of the mouth there. And then these are obviously its eyes and its nose or snout, whatever you want to call it, just a hard bit. And then these are its feelers. Now it uses a lot of, gets a lot of senses out of its feelers. They're usually a lot longer. They've been cut off by the supermarket. But the majority of what a lobster senses comes through its its smelling organs. And it can actually smell a lot of things, and that's what it uses to find its way around, because often they hide in the darkest, deepest places. They want to be as far away from light as possible, so they rely a lot more on their nose than they do on their feelers. Okay, so getting back to what we're doing. So you can get at the insides of the lobster by just sort of reaching your fingers in around the carapace and pulling out and separating. And here you can see the inside. This is the tamale. One thing you can do after you've ripped the legs out is you can actually take the joints out, and in here you'll see these sort of these gills, and they're kind of harder, tougher bits of meat, and they're off-colored. They're a little more green or brown depending on what lobster you have. But in between those gills, you can actually see there's a bit of good meat still there. And that's about all there is that I know of on a lobster to eat. Some people will pick it dry. Some people will just have the little red shell left, and others won't. I myself just like the tails and claws. And that's it. That's all I got.